Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Razam Pereira. Muslim women in Sri Lanka will not be allowed to wear any form of face veils in public from Monday under new regulations announced by the President Maithripala Sirisena, who used emergency powers in the wake of the Easter Sunday bombings. The new regulation banning any form of face covering was announced by the President on Sunday, a week after the coordinated blasts hit 3 churches and 3 luxury hotels, killing over 250 people and injuring more than 500 others. The ban is to ensure national security. No one should obscure their faces to make identification difficult, the President's office said in a statement. Meanwhile, the Catholic Church in Sri Lanka said Monday that the government should crack down on Islamic extremists with more vigor, as if on a war footing in the aftermath of the Easter bombings. Back in India, the National Investigative Agency on Sunday carried out raids at 3 places in Kerala in connection with the Islamic State Kasaragod module case. 3 suspects were questioned by the investigative agency in the aftermath of the bombings in Sri Lanka. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the crackdown in Sri Lanka post the Easter Sunday bombings. Joining me on the program today are Vivek Karju, former ambassador, Alok Bansal, Director, India Foundation, and Ramesh Sundaram, senior journalist. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Ramesh Sundaram, I'd like to begin the program with you. Quite a few developments have taken place over the weekend, both in India and in Sri Lanka. How would you look back at them?
Well, I think what one has to see is the fact that this is an election year in Sri Lanka. Also, the president and the prime minister there are in conflict with each other, and they're being blamed for the security lapses that have happened. And both of them are now trying to seem to be in control and taking tough measures and all of that. And I think this announcement about wearing the burqa and things like that is also cater to the ultra-right, the Sinhalese clerics, and also to the Roman Catholic clergy who are coming out and asking for tough measures. What is required really is a tightening of the intelligence network and the security feature that is there. But unfortunately, what is happening is that both within the government and with the opposition, with the former president Mahinda Rajapakse and his brother, the kind of statements that are coming tend to be blaming each other. They are in that blame game right now, and nobody really seems to be in charge or to assure the people that their security is in the right hands. So clearly, I think these kind of announcements that are coming in are aimed at a particular constituency rather than, and there'll be very little that's done if you tell people that you can't wear a burqa, then the actual intelligence, the actual on-ground security is totally different. So I think this is something that's catering to the popular sentiment in an election year. And of course, we have to keep in mind that after the end of the civil war in Sri Lanka, there were about 1 lakh soldiers that the Sri Lankan army has. It's 4 times that amount or more right now. So they have the infrastructure, they have the wherewithal to take on militancy of the kind that LTT was, which I think is quite formidable. So what is required right now is for the various agencies and departments and institutions within the government to come together and unite and take this on and keep away from the highly politicized army, the politicized agencies, the politicized government that you have right now. So that is what is actually required. But will they be able to do that in an election year? Seems highly unlikely from where I'm looking.
All right. Ambassador, I'd like to bring you into the picture now. Major security lapse really that led to the Easter Sunday bombings. Over 250 people killed. Post that, there have been a few raids. 15 people were killed in that raid as well that took place on Friday. How would you look back at everything that's transpired in the lead up to the bombings and post that?
Look, to my mind, this marks a comprehensive failure on the part of the Sri Lankan political class, which has been disunited and at odds with itself, as well as the intelligence agencies and the security apparatus. Because we still don't know the exact nature and the depth of what has happened. It is unfolding, the contours are now visible, but details will have to be worked out. Certainly, this is a challenge which is quite different from the challenge mounted by the LTTE. For the last 10 years, the Sri Lankans have, and I was reading one report today, some diplomat based there, some European diplomat said that they've become flabby. And that is what it seems, because if And it's mind-boggling that if there was specific information given to them, then not to have acted on that specific information is no other word, it's criminal. And that has led to this. So I think instead of politicking, instead of gestures, now the step they've taken with regard to bearing of face, that is what it means actually, that you shouldn't cover your face when you are in a public place, could well be security related. In times of emergency, you need to be able to identify people easily.
France has done it?
Yes. France always does. France doesn't allow any non-secular, overtly non-secular items, as you know, even in clothing, dress. But if it is not security related, if it is appeasing sentiment, which is naturally very worked up at the moment, then it would be sad. And we'll really have to wait and watch how they look at it. But more than that, my worry is that how will the region respond? Because quite frankly, what has happened there, is it only local? Is it that they were actually getting material help? Or that there was only some kind of vague inspiration coming from the Daesh? We don't know. And that has to be unraveled, and I hope the Sri Lankans will cooperate with our agencies fully, because the first country that can be impacted by this is India.
That's precisely what I wanted to come to, Alok Bansal. Is this something that is very localized, limited to Sri Lanka? Because we have very little information really coming out of Sri Lanka as to how or what was the modus operandi. So is it limited, is it localized, or is it a far bigger problem for the region?
There is no doubt it's a far bigger problem, and I have been saying so. Please understand, Maldives has the highest per capita participation in Al-Qaeda and Islamic State. With the territory under Islamic State's control vanishing into thin air, the people are spreading around. They are getting back. And large number of people, anybody who has to go out of Maldives actually transits through Sri Lanka. Sri Lankan Muslims were getting radicalized for a very, very long time. And there were clear-cut intelligence inputs. Now the fact is that the Muslim community in Sri Lanka has linkages with Maldives, has linkages with South India, and large number, they have even linkages with Pakistan. And that's been clearly established. And that's why Indian agencies had probably given them a very clear-cut, definitive intelligence. But as Mr. Sundaram said, there the problem is of divisions and the differences between the President and Prime Minister. President holds the defense portfolio. He did not pass it on to others. President now claims that he was not informed. Now to cover up that flaw, which is a very serious flaw, and I think now actions are being taken. To my mind, this step of preventing people from covering their faces is a right step, and I think it should be taken globally. Because in this era, when you have CCTV cameras to actually prevent things, now somebody doesn't act and you can't even identify who has done it, I think is a big setback. Now,
but what about hurting the religious sentiments?
See, religious sentiments can be defined. In fact, religious sentiments need to be transformed. The religions need to transform with the ages, with the times that come through. And that's what there was a time when even Caliphate had this. Abbasid Caliphate had Mehna, and Al-Mamun to Al-Mutwakil, they had a thing that everything needs to be interpreted in light of contemporary developments. Now, religious sentiments, I think there is a very, very serious debate whether a full body burqa or full covering of the head is required in Islam. That itself is a debatable point. Tomorrow somebody will say my religious sentiments get hurt, my religion says, because all the terrorists who are killing people are also taking the garb of religious sentiments. They are saying that their religion actually requires them to kill non-believers, and that's what they are doing it. So when religion comes into conflict with what is rational and what is humane, I think national laws prevail. I think the very clear-cut directions to that point. And I think Sri Lanka has shown in the past that they have the willpower to take on such things. But I'd like to digress. One issue.
I'll come back to you, but I think you may have stirred up the hornet's nest. Both the panelists want to come in on the discussion on the religious aspect of it. Yes, Ambassador,
on the religious aspect, I am reminded of what I heard in Malaysia. I served there from 1990 to 93. Apparently, the Malaysian Home Minister, who was Ghazali Shafi, veteran, eminence Greece, of the Malaysian diplomatic and security apparatus, he decreed that no lady, that everyone working in government will have his face uncovered for an identity card. But some ladies there who were orthodox said that we wear a veil and we will not be able to give this photograph. And this is what I heard. Now I can't vouch for it, but I heard this. He at that stage asked them, when you pray, when you offer the namaz, then is your face uncovered? And they said yes. You can't have a veil when you're offering the namaz. So he said, well, this is the requirement of state. So if it is a requirement of state, then I think an exception can be made, even in the case of ladies who are what is termed as parda nashi. So that is there, and I for one don't think that the religious sensibilities will actually be hurt if there is an emergency requirement of this nature. Besides, one other thing, let us not forget that the kind of Islam which is represented by these mazhabs, like the ISIS is propagating, is not traditional to the Islam of the subcontinent or the regions abutting the subcontinent like Sri Lanka. And that is why among this is in the media now, that many traditional ulama there were telling the government that beware of all this that is happening, this radicalization that is happening, which is contrary to our beliefs.
Right. Right. Yes, Ramesh Sundaram.
No, a quick point about, the history of the conflict in Sri Lanka lies in its constitution, the unitary polity, where all the power is centered in Colombo with a majoritarian Sinhalese government. That is the genesis of the Tamil militancy as well, because unless there's devolution of powers, the conflict will always remain. Even in the case of the Tamil rebellion, the underlying reasons for that conflict still remain. There was a full military victory, and now you have a militarization of the north and east, and that has been subdued. But the potent grounds for that is always there. If you see, the right-wing Sinhalese monks have been very aggressive in their conflict with the Muslim populations in the east, in Batticaloa, Amparai. In 2014-18, there have been communal riots where Muslim businesses were affected, Muslim properties were seized, and there was a lot of disaffection there. The perception within the Muslim community there, which has been largely peaceful, they are Tamil speaking, and during the 30-year civil war, they were never aligned with any of the Tamil militant groups. As a matter of fact, they have suffered because of the the ethnic cleansing that was done by the LTT in the north, where Muslims were en masse deported from there. So this disaffection has also been added by the fact that there is a perception that the government is not doing enough to enforce a rule of law there, because these powerful clerics, the Buddhist clerics, are getting away with a whole lot of things which is perceived to be adding to this disaffection. And you have to see this in that background. Since the end of the civil war, there have been many cases, many instances where there has been a conflict with the majority Sinhalese, with the Tamils, of course, which is ongoing. You have it with the Muslims that has started after the end of the civil war. And this is the grounds to which the Wahhabism there has increased, and also the current situation where you have a very influential section of the Muslim population there, which is now having alliances with the international jihadist groups like Daesh, and they are coming in. So the underlying reason here is the political devolution of powers to all minorities within a structure which is more federal than the unitary that it has been since this thing. And also for there to be between the various communities and Colombo a confidence building talks and actual devolution, so that the legitimate political aspirations of these minorities is understood, and some bit of that is addressed as well, rather than just being.
If we can move away from the religious aspect of it and talk about quickly.
No, I just wanted to make 2 points, which is very clear. There is no doubt that devolution is essential. In fact, most Sri Lankan Sinhalese believe that federalism is a prelude to separatism, which is not so. I think 13th Amendment ensured certain amount of devolution. But this attack, let me make it very clear, is not because of devolution. BBS did attack Muslim establishments between 2014 and 18. This attack is not against singular Buddhists. Please understand, this attack is carefully calibrated and carried out against Christian minority and against upscale hotels where foreign tourists stay. It's actually got very clear-cut signs of Daesh. Please understand, Easter attacks has been a regular feature with Daesh. It has happened in Pakistan in a number of places. This has happened in different places. So it is categorically a Daesh attack, a different stream. It is not the mainstream Muslim. There are grievances of Muslims. There have been attacks in central province also, in Kandy, Colombo belt also, western province. There have been certain attacks on Muslim establishment. A third thing is, please understand who have carried out the attacks. These are educated elite. This is not marginalized sections of the society as many people like to project, that this Islamic terrorism is primarily because of deprivation or things like that. These are educated elite. You have seen the video that Daesh has released. Now you have men, women who are actually conspiring to kill people, and they are driven by a narrative, and this narrative has a theological underpinning. Please understand, this can only be countered by a counter narrative which again is seeped into theology. So that is what is required. It cannot clearly be eliminated by bombs and bullets. Unlike LTT, which was geographically confined, this is actually, the Muslims are fairly widespread, though of course they have been totally eliminated virtually from northern province, but Amparai, Baltikalova, the eastern province, they have a substantive number. They have in Kandy a substantive number in the central province. They also have it in western province. So they are spread out. Eliminating, it is not a brute military power that is required to eliminate that. You have to actually think about how to eliminate this sort of a thing, and this has to be done. You have to target the brain, and for that you need a counter narrative. This battle cannot be won by bombs and bullets alone.
Okay, all right, let's move on now and talk about Sri Lanka's economy. Sri Lanka's economy is already in the doldrums. You know, the attack has only worsened it even further. How does the Sri Lankan establishment really react to this?
Well, it'll take them a lot of time. Quite clearly, tourism is an important segment of that economy, and tourism cannot be sustained in a situation like this where 38 foreign tourists died, including some people from great affluence. So if that is the situation, I think the Sri Lankan economy will take a battering. That is to be expected. But I think for the economy also to be revived, a certain confidence will have to be given that the political class and the security apparatus of Sri Lanka is serious about handling these issues. I too subscribe to the view that if this was entirely local, then if there had to be an attack, it would not have been on Christians, it would have been on the Sinhalese, extremist Sinhalese, and there was some element of that when some Buddhist statues, etc., were being defaced. So that was correlated with these attacks on Muslim establishments. But this is a completely different thing, and quite honestly, there isn't much in the public domain yet for us to come to some firm conclusions on the impact of the dissolution of territory in Syria and Iraq, which was held by ISIS or Daesh, and its impact on how it has mutated elsewhere. We know that there is a base developing in Afghanistan. That is worrying a lot of people. We also know that that in Pakistan there is some thinking on these lines, and that it was also expected that part of the mutation would be that Daesh would find ways of spreading its ideological tentacles far and wide. Is this one of it? This manifestation? If it is so, then it's worrying, because if young women are willing to get killed along with their young children, that's a matter of deep concern.
Sure. So, taking the discussion forward, Rajesh Sundaram, the Catholic Church in Sri Lanka has asked the Sri Lankan government really to take on the extremists on a war footing. Else, they wouldn't be held responsible, or they wouldn't be responsible if people took matters into their own hands. Are we staring at a situation like that where we could see some kind of street violence and people taking matters into their own hands?
Well, first about the fact that it was the Christians who were hurt and not the Buddhists. But I think without the local modules being effective, this attack would not have been possible. So clearly there are linkages with local groups and the Daesh, and without that it wouldn't have happened. And the disaffection that I was talking about and the growth of the Wahhabi sects that have come in was the fertile ground that led to this. Now coming to your question, they had to ban social media, and I think the ban continues till now, and they're looking at a permanent ban there because they know the communal situation is extremely volatile after these attacks. So you can imagine, when a terror attack of this magnitude happens in a situation where already the communal tension is extremely high, it is a crisis for the government and indeed community leaders, religious leaders. So what the Christian religious leaders are saying today, that it will be difficult for them unless the government is seen as taking tough measures, I think is born out of what they are seeing, the kind of feedback and reactions that they're getting from within their own community. Clearly now the situation is under control because there is very high security. The communally sensitive areas are being, there's special attention being paid to them, and social media has been entirely shut down. So, but will that remain the same if the public anger is not contained by the action that the people are taking? That's something that's worrying the bishop who spoke today, and people like him who are interacting with people from the community about the anger that there is within, especially after these attacks which killed so many people.
Right. Alok Bansal, could the situation have been handled any differently? What could have been done?
See, once they had an intelligence input, they could have at least, like
post the bombings I'm talking, yes, intelligence failure.
Before, if you said that even the churches were not informed that they are actually a target, so they could have taken some precautionary measures. This has not been. I think what they are doing right now, I think is reasonably good, that they are also trying to avoid, because we are not getting complete inputs, because there are reports of that Muslims having taken shelters in mosques, etc., because they are extremely scared, because they know that there is bound to be a reaction of that sort of a thing. Now what has happened is the news that you are getting from Sri Lanka is coming relatively filtered and things like that. But the fact is, if this sort of an outfit has existed, there will be different strands, and the government must try and crack, because we have seen what happened just the day before. When they went to arrest those people, they blew themselves up. There are attacks taking place. There will be different modules you will find at different parts of Sri Lanka, and they will have linkages in India. We saw yesterday somebody blew himself up. Of course, what was it? It was this or not. Something happened in southern India. There have been certain attacks in certain places in southern India where police are trying to investigate. So there will be strands, and I think at this juncture to pass comment on what the government is doing, and I think this is extremely bold step by the government to prevent covering of the face, because this is an essential requirement in today's day and age when you have CCTVs, cameras, and which are a very, very good tool to identify the criminal and to prevent the recurrence of such cases.
Sure.
Because otherwise, if you see that video which IS has released, now that shows that even, I'm not trying to say that the outfit which has carried out are outsiders. They were all locals. There is no doubt about it. But you see what they are saying. They are talking in Arabic in the last, that pledge which they are taking is in Arabic, a language which is as alien to them as anybody else. Now that sort of motivation, that sort of indoctrination has taken place, and that's how they have gone and attacked. And please understand, in Sri Lankan context, Catholic community is the affluent and the elite community. The Catholics by and large constitute the elite of Sri Lanka. Sri Lankan elite is, what is it? So they have been targeted. The big hotels have been targeted where actually foreigners are staying, where people were celebrating, where foreigners were there. So it is a very, very targeted attack, and there is no doubt in my mind that there has been, in fact, right, I have been saying it from the first day, that there are very clear-cut IS linkages which are visible, because IS has, this is not the first attack which IS has carried out on Easter. They have carried out so many attacks on Easter, and Easter Sunday attacks have been the trademark of IS.
Sure. So what are the implications for India, Ambassador, because this has happened in our neighboring country?
Look, in any, the object is to prevent these things. Ideally, from happening at all. Certainly, that there has to be a prevention of any repetition. For that, specific information is required. It is not sufficient to have a general idea, but you need specific things, and that is what I suggested right at the beginning, that has to be the endeavor of not only the Sri Lankan agencies, but our agencies, and I am confident that our agencies are alive to the dangers that there are there, including to us. We need to get to the bottom of it specifically, so that these things are contained before they spread. Clearly, it is a dangerous time. And for the time being, it seems, at least, and I concede the point that Alok was making, the news from Sri Lanka is filtered. But from whatever is coming, it seems that the government now is trying to do whatever is needed. They've absorbed the first shock, and now they realize that even for their own political survival, they'll need to do take all the correct actions, and they're taking them. But much of this is played subterranean, the intelligence cooperation, etc. We can't expect that will be out in the open.
Right.
But as I think it would be taking place. There is a link, and I think the Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe had said that if they need, they'll take also the assistance of Pakistani agencies. I don't know how far that will be forthcoming to them, but certainly a thing like this would be worrying, should be, I wouldn't say would, but should be worrying to the Pakistanis, because if the ISIS gets its tentacles in Pakistan, there is enough sectarian material available for a conflagration there.
Absolutely.
So it's a time when the region needs to come together to see what has happened.
Fragile situation, fragile moment, and the entire region should come together as one to deal with this particular issue, is what the ambassador is suggesting. On that note, I'll take closing comments from all my guests. 2 minutes left, so I'm going to ask you to be very, very brief. Ramesh Sundaram, the best way forward.
Well, I think we already have the infrastructure to spread, stop the spread of this Daesh up north into India. I think that infrastructure existed to prevent the LTT, right from the Q branch of the Tamil Nadu police to the kind of intelligence network that the Navy and the other institutions have. Perhaps in the last 10 years since the end of the civil war in Sri Lanka, that may have diminished a little bit, but it's time for us to reinforce those systems that were put in place to guard against the Tamil Tigers, now to guard against this, and reinforce that, so that's something that is
the infrastructure that we had to guard was to guard people from coming. It is not an infrastructure that can guard ideas from coming. And in this particular case, this is the ideas, the cyber world, the internet, it prevents. So we have to create a counter narrative. The government needs to have a counter narrative to counter this radicalization. And radicalization will invariably result in terrorism if you don't prevent it.
Okay. Ambassador, close the show for us with concluding remarks.
The counter narrative has to be through the strengthening of the indigenous Islamic mazhabs of the subcontinent and of Sri Lanka. Now, these indigenous mazhabs are accommodative mazhabs. The indigenous schools of Islam, which developed in this area, are quite different from the schools that developed in, say, the Arabian Peninsula, because this had to be accommodative.
Right.
That has to be strengthened, and I don't think governments can play much of a role. This initiative has to come from the Islamic Muslim communities themselves.
Okay, all right. On that note, then I'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me. See you again next time.